Hey there, I'm Dr. Richard Fish. I'm very grateful to have been asked by my colleague, Dr. Ann Stout, and by Heather Patrick to be next year's honoree for the Prevent Blindness Texas Dark Dinner. It was supposed to have taken place last year, and for obvious reasons, things got rescheduled and shuffled a bit. So I look forward to helping celebrate that event next year. I wanted to give everyone a sneak preview, a short presentation of part of the program for next year, a subject that just really became very near and dear to my heart, which is the subject of the blind musician. And I came upon this topic by way of another book written by a couple of ophthalmologists called The Artist's Eyes. And in it, they talk about the visual disabilities and all aspects of color and light and some famous biographical examples. For instance, Paul Henry and Charles Marion were painters who were color deficient. We don't use the term colorblind, but they had red-green color deficiency and still managed to paint. Similarly, in another chapter of the book, Dr. Marmer wonders whether Impressionists, who are famous for these blurred pictures, could they have been myopic? Could they have been uncorrected myopes looking at the world the way that they painted? Well, the answer is no, and he pretty clearly, emphatically says that these are just artistic choices rather than true visual disabilities. So people like Monet and Cezanne, that was their painting style that was popular during the period of Impressionism. Similarly, people have asked whether artists like El Greco, Modigliani, and Giacometti, could they have possibly suffered from astigmatism? And again, the answer is a resounding no, that these were artistic choices rather than some sort of refractive error or visual disability. But there were several artists, very prominent artists, who suffered from real live visual disabilities due to organic eye disease. Claude Monet famously had cataracts very late in his life, and you can see the impact of that on a painting that he would do many, many times, that of his Japanese footbridge at his gardens at Giverny. And you can see the contrast between his earlier and later versions of that, the later version being very much affected by his worsening cataract. Edgar Degas was an Impressionist painter who suffered from something that we don't really know what it was, probably an inherited retinal dystrophy, but you can see that this theme of a woman drying herself after the bath would become very coarse due to his vision impairment, and the contrast between his earlier and later works is really quite remarkable. Well, I am a retinal surgeon and ophthalmologist by day, but my real passion is music. And I've been very fortunate to play in a number of very cool bands and have a very active musical career. And so the idea of impairment in artists kind of extended for me into what happens to people who are impaired visually in the performing arts. That led me to write this little book that's available on Amazon.com. It's a self-published book and kind of a soup to nuts, everything you might want to know about the blind musicians: history, what were their eye diseases, how would we treat them today, all sorts of topics. How do blind people have such great ability to do perfect pitch? And all of these topics are kind of covered in this book. And by the way, I don't make any money off of this. All proceeds are donated to Prevent Blindness Texas. So in the book, I talk a little bit about blind musicians in history, blind musicians in art, and that theme has come up a number of times, ranging from paintings on Egyptian tombs all the way to Pablo Picasso. I talk a little bit about the great blind blues musicians of the early 20th century, including Blind Lemon Jefferson here. Talk about more famous blind musicians such as Ray Charles, who suffered from congenital glaucoma. Another patient with congenital glaucoma is seen here on the left. Stevie Wonder, perhaps the greatest blind musician of all. Stevie had retinopathy of prematurity, which is a condition that is not often seen in developed countries now, thanks to very extensive screening, testing, and treatment protocols. So this is actually something that would not be seen with the frequency that it was when Stevie Wonder was an infant. Then I talk a little bit about perfect pitch and how it's phenomenally common in blind individuals, and it seems to involve recruiting parts of the brain that you can see on functional MRI studies like this and also like this, that the parts of the brain that are used in blind musicians is a whole different part of the brain than is normally used in people who are sighted musicians. Well, there you have it. The blind musician, maybe a few other surprises, maybe some live music. We had talked about quite a few things that we were planning on, and hopefully we'll be able to do next year in a post-COVID world. Look forward to seeing you next year, and thank you again.